Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Mancini. I'm the Executive Director of Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, and really appreciate everyone being here for our first of what will probably be many Metropolitan Beaches Commission's hearings and conversations on climate resiliency on our metropolitan beaches. Before we get started and introduce our panel, I'm going to turn it over to our Environmental Policy Assistant, Aaliyah Zwire, who will just go over the rules and best practices for a Zoom meeting. I don't expect any of it will be surprising to anyone here, but we'd like to make sure we're all on the same page. Aaliyah?
All right, so some hearing reminders, starting off with the fact that all participants are going to be muted on entry, and then also you can go to the bottom right, the bottom left of your screen to mute or turn on your video. Also use the raise hand function to raise your hand to ask a question or to speak if you have something you want to add, so that we can keep everything in order. As Chris said, the meeting is going to be recorded and then transcribed, and it's going to be sent to you guys later on. And the chat, so you can use the chat also to put questions in, because it's going to be monitored by the Save the Harbor staff. And I'm going to pop the agenda in there. Actually, let's see if I can do that right now. And we're going to have a transcription available on Zoom. So let me show you that there. On the Zoom taskbar. And also, we just want to say we are talking about some stuff that is kind of sensitive for some people. So if you want to take a moment, go ahead, you can mute yourself and turn off your video if you'd like. And for language interpretation, you can do that on Zoom by going to the Zoom bar, and then you'll see the interpretation section. So click that and then it'll show up. So yeah. Can everyone click on the agenda? Is that working for you guys?
Should probably ask if anyone can't. Let us know.
Yes. Yeah.
We did not receive any requests for interpretation, so if anyone does need interpretation, please reach directly out to Aaliyah, and we will try to put that together. Yeah, we'll keep posting the agenda as people join, so you can make sure to follow along. So with that, I will just welcome everybody. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. Special thanks to all of our Metropolitan Beaches commissioners, to our panelists from Coastal Zone Management, DCR, Boston Planning and Development Agency, and the town of Hull, and of course, all of our elected officials and community members and stakeholders for being here today. I think we're all at a point where we agree that climate change is real, it's happening, and we scheduled this hearing specifically for a hot and humid day after some record rainfall just to make that point. So, good to know that we are in control of the weather, as we always knew we would be. For today, our goal is really to start this conversation from the point of view of the Metropolitan Beaches. Our goal is not to reduplicate efforts, which is why we've brought our panel together to talk about what is happening already, establish a baseline, and begin to come to a consensus on prioritizing resiliency and protection of and on our metropolitan beaches from Nahant to Nantasket. And we'll be beginning by hearing from our panel on existing priorities and projects, and then we'll open it up and we'll hear from all of you in a question and answer and comment style to try to answer 3 questions, which we'll share again. But those 3 questions that we're really looking to hear from is, what is working right now in your community for climate resiliency? Number 2, where's the gap? What does your community need? And 3, what do you value about your waterfront that you want to see preserved and protected into the future? So again, we'll share those visually before the comment period, and that's really how we're looking at this. And with that, though, I would like to turn it over to our co-chairs, beginning with our Metropolitan Beach co-chair, Senator Brendan Crichton, just to say some welcoming remarks. Senator?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to everyone here for joining, to all of our friends at Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, and the Metropolitan Beaches Commission, all the members who were able to join today. I'll be brief. We have a great panel of experts who we all want to hear from, and obviously get a back and forth conversation about this important issue. And definitely an issue when I first started at the State House wasn't the top of everybody's agenda, but it certainly is now. Climate resiliency, particularly for those of us that represent communities along the coast. I was thinking just this weekend, we went out to the beach in Nahant, and my son said, "Dad, can you imagine if the whole world was water?" And at first I started thinking of Waterworld, the great Kevin Costner film. And then I thought, you know what, Nate, actually, your little fantasy is not that far fetched. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but your generation is going to be dealing with some serious issues around that. And we're already actually dealing with it now. Thankfully, there's enough distractions at the beach to not completely ruin his day. But joking aside, this is a serious issue, one that affects us now, but thinking about future generations and what exactly the beaches look like. And imagining Massachusetts without beaches is certainly a troubling notion for all of us. And I was also just, reading through the report, you immediately zoom into your hometown, and I represent Nahant, separated just by a peninsula or causeway. And on my election day back in 2018, huge storm. The causeway was completely flooded. I went out there with the Nahant police chief, and we drove around, and it really was like imagining if the world was covered in water. The entire peninsula was just underwater. And those storms continue to increase in intensity and in frequency. Sadly, one of our new favorite pastimes here in Lynn is going down to the seawall all along from Kings Beach all the way to Nahant. Anytime there's a storm, and watching the waves crash over. It's a beautiful sight, but a very troubling sight, and it draws crowds. But at some point, that's going to lead to obvious destruction and certainly changing our infrastructure around. And we are not alone up here. This goes up and down our coast, and certainly some major consequences should we not act. So with that, I believe turn it over to Adrian Madaro, the co-chair. Adrian, you here?
Adrian did have a last minute scheduling conflict, but Glorabel Rivas from his office is here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you, Chris, for putting this together. I'll be brief. Representative Motter unfortunately had a last minute scheduling conflict, but he's incredibly grateful for the work that everyone does here. It's incredibly important that we begin to address the way that the climate crisis will affect every facet of public life, including our access to our precious metropolitan public beaches. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panelists today, and anybody else who has any thoughts to share on ways that we can begin to do that, to build upon the work that's already been done. So thank you so much, Chris, and pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Glorabel. I do want to, not to put you on the spot, but our Vice Chair, Joan Moschino, if you'd care to say a word of welcome as well, I'd love to give you that opportunity.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Chris. No, I'm just delighted that the Metropolitan Beaches Commission is hosting this hearing on one of the big existential issues of our time. We have magnificent beaches, and we just need to be thoughtful and mindful as we make our investments in them to have our lenses climate. I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say, and I just want to thank Christian Crawford from the town of Hull to be here. I hope you will all stay on to hear his remarks, because the town of Hull has had great experience as a barrier beach to Boston Harbor, and the investments that we've been making, both private, state, local, and federal, really are around resilience and making sure that the beach is there for many, many, many years to come. And Christian has great expertise in that. So I direct you all to that, and thank you all for being here. And I look forward to hearing all of your remarks.
Thank you so much, Representative. Would like to now introduce our panel, and the way our agenda will work is we'll hear from our panelists, and then we'll go into Q&A for any of the panelists and comments. And when we get to that point, we will begin with our elected representatives and go north to south, and try to cluster based on community, so we can have community by community conversation as we go. So yes, we really thank you again to all of our panelists for being here. We'll hear from each about a 10-minute presentation about what is really happening, what the priorities are at the state and some municipal levels, the projects that are going on already to address climate resiliency and in planning and design, and again, start to give us a jumping off point for this conversation. So with that, I would like to begin with Julia Niesel from Coastal Zone Management. And Julia, you should be able to share your screen. And if not, we will make sure that's possible. And thank you for being here. You're on mute still, which I just said while I was on mute.
I apologize. So thank you for having me. I'm Julia Neisel. I manage the shoreline and floodplain team for the state's Office of Coastal Zone Management. We sit within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and we do planning work at the state and municipal levels, and we also provide data that supports decision making and have a grant program that has been funding this work for over 10 years now. So I'm going to start with walking through some resources that can inform this work. Hold on one second. Okay, so I want to call your attention to our Coast Guide online. We have this tool to bring the public to our beaches that are open and accessible. And I want to point out the fact that in the metro area, we do have a large number of DCR beaches that are accessed, but we also have municipal beaches as well. And when we talk about climate resilience and coastal resilience, we do encourage regional collaboration and larger scale efforts to restore landforms and bring back natural coastal buffering. So I want you to remember that this isn't one jurisdiction's responsibility, that we need to work across agencies and partners. As you all know, seawalls and revetments line the DCR beaches in the metro area, as well as the municipal beaches. And many of these structures were put in place over 100 years ago when sea level was a foot lower. And we're in a situation now where we need to look closely at the condition of these structures. We have that data, and we also need to look at the height of the structures relative to our current tides and storm surge, as well as future conditions as well. And think about the structure type in relation to the beach itself. What is the dry beach out in front of that structure? How much of a wave impact is that structure experiencing? So I call your attention to our MyCoast reports. I have the link here. A lot of you might not be familiar with this effort. We have a team of individuals who actually go out during and immediately after coastal storm events to document what's happening along the shoreline. So we see those high water levels, those waves crashing along Lynshore Drive. And we have a long-term archive of that information to show where there's hotspots along the shoreline. So this is just a map of where we're seeing wave impacts and storm surge along Lynn. We do take volunteers for storm reporting. So if anybody wants to help the effort, please access the website, create an account, and we have a very user-friendly app that you can upload photos and share with the effort. So now getting to shoreline change. As I mentioned, coastal structures line this entire region, and they've been in place for 100 years or more. And these structures are largely limiting how much the shoreline can migrate back. So I have a map here from Hull, and you can see that there are red transects out in front of Nantasket Beach that indicates that there has been long-term erosion at that location. However, the rate of erosion over the long term is only on average of about 1/2 foot per year because of the coastal structures that are there and all of the infrastructure that's behind the beach. So what we really need to start talking about is beach lowering, not just beach erosion back into the community. We are losing beach volume, and that's something that we really need to address. In the photo here of the DCR parking lot, you can see that sand and gravel would overwash the seawall and is laying in the parking lot. some of that material actually washes over narrow parts of barrier beaches and gets deposited into the marsh. So the beach is losing volume in this mechanism, but it's also moving along shore, and it gets carried offshore as well during major storms. Now, sea level rise. I mentioned our historic rate has been about a foot over the last century. Moving forward, we have the good fortune of having excellent climate scientists in Massachusetts that have developed projections specifically for all of our tide gauges in Boston, Nantucket, Woods Hole, and also some of the secondary gauges as well. And we can look at different future outcomes based on how globally we are addressing emissions. And I want to point out that the state is focusing on the high emissions scenario out to 2070 for coastal flood risk modeling. And this information has been brought forward into the state climate assessment that was released back in December, and also is carried through the update to the state hazard mitigation plan, state mitigation and climate adaptation plan, which will be signed and released in September. So I want to show you what that looks like in the Tinian Beach area. Please take a look at our sea level rise and coastal flooding viewer. In addition to showing static sea level rise scenarios in communities, and also FEMA flood insurance rate maps, which many of you are familiar with, we now have the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model in here. This is a future looking model that takes into account sea level rise. And you see here in the 2050 scenario of a 100-year or 1% storm that we can have depths of floodwaters up to 5 or more feet in the Tinian Beach parking lot. And that is one reason why this particular location has been a focus for a coastal resilience grant project. So as I mentioned in the beginning, CZM offers grants to address coastal erosion and flooding issues. We launched this program in 2014, and we've granted out over $37 million to projects in communities. Currently, coastal communities, as well as nonprofit organizations that own land that's open and accessible to the public, are eligible. And just this year, we've also added tribal partners as eligible applicants as well. And we work on everything from proactive planning and community outreach to retrofitting infrastructure. And a priority for this discussion is shoreline restoration. So I'm gonna get out ahead of Christian and celebrate the good work that Hull has been doing, and point out that 2 years after the North Nantasket dunes were restored, they are thriving. The dune grass is filling in, and we have a nice growing coastal buffer here to help address coastal storm impacts in the community. And we want to see more of this work across the metro area. There's great opportunity for beach and dune restoration to help bring up the volume of these coastal buffers so that wave impacts aren't causing as much damage to the community. And we're preserving our recreational beach access. That is incredibly important. So I want to point you finally to a series of fact sheets that we have on our website. They're called Storm Smart Properties fact sheets. And these provide good tips when you're moving forward with projects to bring up the volume of the beach and dune, and also think about how you're going to repair failing seawalls and revetments that are taking pretty significant wave impacts. And let's make sure that when they are repaired or reconstructed, that they're not causing more damage to the beach. So that's my quick intro, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions and comments, but we're going to ask folks just to make a note of them, and we'll hold them till the close of the panel. So with that, I'd like to thank Nick Connors and Susan Hamilton from Department of Conservation and Recreation for being here. I know you guys, Sarah White's out on vacation this week, but I really appreciate you being here. And I would like to introduce you for just the comments from DCR and where your perspective on where we're coming from.
Thanks, Chris. Excuse me. So thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief overview of the DCR's efforts to address climate change. I want to acknowledge that our team would have loved to be here, as you mentioned, but we had some previously scheduled time away. With that, let me tell you a little bit about the way DCR has organized itself over the last few years. And my apologies that this may be a bit dry since I do not have a presentation, but I'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. As you may know, DCR's mission is to protect, promote, and enhance our natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. DCR stewards more than 450,000 acres throughout the state, including 27 saltwater beaches, many of which are right here in Boston Harbor, in the greater Boston area. Climate change is already exacerbating natural hazards and extreme weather events and leading to new impacts that will affect the Commonwealth. This is such a critical issue that DCR recognized this and established a new office in early 2021 to develop and implement an agency framework that ensures that climate change considerations are incorporated into agency initiatives and agency projects. This small office works across the spectrum with federal, state, regional, and municipal partners to ensure that the agency is implementing one of DCR's core principles to advance climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts by implementing sustainable practices and advancing resiliency across our infrastructure, our assets, and our resources. To achieve this, DCR's Office of Climate Resilience, which Sarah White leads, promotes the following guidance. DCR will take action at the properties we steward to reduce exposure to natural hazards, eliminate or significantly reduce emissions from fossil fuels, mitigate adverse climate impacts and provide benefits, and protect, conserve, and restore natural, recreational, and historic resources. Recently, DCR developed a climate change vulnerability assessment to systematically assess each DCR property at its site level on vulnerability to 5 primary climate hazards. This GIS-based analysis considers at the site level, again, climate exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. The results allow DCR to better understand the degree to which our assets are exposed to natural hazards and to climate stressors. This methodology will take care to document the adaptive capacity and sensitivity of our unique resources, including things like swimming beaches. For example, DCR will soon be kicking off an update to the Nantastic Reservation Master Plan, first published in 2016, with climate and sea level rise impacts in mind. It's prudent for DCR to develop an approach that focuses specifically on the agency's mission and assets to ensure we protect the special character and natural resources throughout the Commonwealth. CZM and DCR are using the same climate projections and the same coastal flood risk models, which will look at sea level rise and work collaboratively on developing projects which meet or exceed climate design standards. An example is at Tenian Beach, where DCR is assessing, along with BPDA and the City of Boston, how the projections from sea level rise will impact our Neponset River Greenway that runs through the property, and exploring ways to ensure that we can continue to offer safe, accessible multi-use trails when frequent inundation is occurring. With the new Office of Climate Resiliency and the first vulnerability assessment methodology for our state park system, DCR is ensuring that operations, our management plans, and our infrastructure design address projected climate change and impact through mitigation, prevention, and adaptation. DCR is working to position itself to support the Commonwealth's goals to be both a leader and an innovator in climate resilience in the years to come. I will caution that although I don't have the depth of expertise to address many of the questions on the panel, I will be here for the whole hearing, and I look forward to hearing from everyone, and I will be reporting back to Sarah and the team following the hearing. So thank you very much for having me, Chris, and again, I apologize that Sarah and Celeste weren't available today.
No, thank you so much, Nick. It's so we've been such longtime partners, both at the commission level and the nonprofit level with DCR. You know, it's really fantastic to have you here. And I know that Kat and Delaney are going to touch on some of the partnership projects that they have, that BBTA has with DCR. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Kat McCandless and Delaney Morris from the City of Boston and the Boston Planning and Development Agency.
Thank you, Chris. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that all right? Awesome. Okay, so hi everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with you this morning to share a bit about the City of Boston and the BPDA's coastal resilience work with you. My name is Catherine McCandless, and I'm a climate resilience project manager with the City of Boston's Environment Department, where I work on the Climate Ready Boston initiative. And I am joined today by my colleague, Delaney Morris, who I will let introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting us here. I'm Delaney Morris, she, her, and I'm a resilience and waterfront planner at the Boston Planning and Development Agency, and the project manager on the Tinian Beach project, which you've heard about a couple of times now today.
So our presentation today is going to cover a brief overview of Climate Ready Boston's initiative and our coastal resilience efforts, focusing specifically on Boston's beaches. It may not always be the first thing that comes to mind when people picture Boston in their head, but Boston is home to many urban beaches that are truly a defining characteristic of our waterfront, specifically in the neighborhoods of East Boston, South Boston, and Dorchester. These beaches serve residents and visitors not only in Boston, but across the region, and provide important open spaces for people to embrace outdoor recreation and spend time close to nature. And it's also especially important for people to have these outdoor spaces as we continue to experience hotter temperatures as they rise. So even though beaches can provide cooler spaces during the hot summer months, they're also incredibly vulnerable to coastal flooding from sea level rise and storm surge, as has already been discussed. These are some images from recent coastal storms from 2018 and 2022 at Castle Island, Day Boulevard, and Malibu Beach, as well as high tide flooding at Tinian Beach in 2020. And moving forward, we know that these beaches will experience more frequent and intense coastal flooding as sea levels continue to rise. And it's important to the City of Boston and to our residents that we preserve these spaces, both for people, but also for wildlife and for the ecological benefits that they provide. In Boston, we've been planning for future coastal flooding since 2016, when the city released the Climate Ready Boston report, which evaluated the current and future impacts of climate change. And since 2016, we've conducted neighborhood-focused coastal resilience planning efforts in each of Boston's coastal communities. And as a result, we now have a roadmap for how the city intends to address coastal flood risk across the entire 47 miles of Boston's coastline. These coastal resilience plans have essentially included 4 kind of key process goals to help us determine how and where to adapt our coastline to address flood risk. These have included, first, identifying the location, timing, and extent of flood risk. We anticipate the area being vulnerable to fringe flooding or to a bigger flood pathway. Second, we have worked to engage stakeholders to identify priorities, opportunities, and constraints to inform the preferred coastal resilience strategies at pretty much every location along the coast. Third, developing effective coastal resilience solutions that account for the necessary elevation that's needed to protect an area or an amenity like an urban beach and provide co-benefits for the community. And last, we focused on creating an implementation roadmap that outlines the timing by which each of these solutions need to be constructed and next steps for advancing each of these proposed projects. So when exploring potential strategies for addressing flooding, our coastal resilience toolkit includes kind of a variety of green, gray, and hybrid approaches depending on the location and existing condition and land ownership along the waterfront. These may include elevating the Boston Harbor Walk, building new or enhancing existing waterfront parks, constructing berms or dunes, utilizing more nature-based strategies and ecological restoration approaches, raising roadways, building flood walls or seawalls, and adapting waterfront buildings and structures. And I won't go into great detail into all of these, but I would like to highlight a few of the proposed strategies for some of Boston's beaches that were included in the plans. So for example, L and M Street Beach and Pleasure Bay in South Boston. For this area, the team recommended a number of different approaches across the area, including elevating the harbor walk, raising low-lying roadways, reinforcing seawalls, and floodproofing waterfront buildings. Over at Moakley Park, dune restoration and beach nourishment approaches along Carson Beach would really complement the ongoing Moakley Park redesign and resilience project that we're currently working on with our Parks Department in the city. At Malibu Beach and Dorchester, the team looked at strategies such as an elevated park space at McConnell Park, which was actually completed last year, I believe. Beach expansion, living shorelines, landscape berms, and road elevation similarly for low-lying roadways that are vulnerable. And last, at Constitution Beach in East Boston, we looked at a system of berms and dunes with a reinforced core that would preserve the sandy beach and protect the blue line from flooding. So the city is hard at work to bring each of these strategies from conceptual planning through advanced design and permitting, and finally to construction. And community engagement has been spanning the process from the initiation of our different plans through the design and permitting processes for each of the projects that we've been moving forward. And so I'll end with a couple of examples of this, which include Moakley Park and Moakley Connectors and Tinian Beach, which has been mentioned a number of times, both of which are vulnerable to near-term fringe flooding and flood pathways and are therefore high priorities for the city to address, not just for coastal resilience, but also for the recreational and habitat value that enhancing these beaches can provide to the community and to the broader region. So Tinian Beach recently completed the schematic design phase. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Delaney to share more about that process and the outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. So as mentioned, I'll be chatting through this case study of the resilient Dorchester waterfront at Tinian Beach and Connolly Street. Next slide, please. So this project was led by the Boston Planning and Development Agency, which is where I work, in partnership with the City of Boston's Environment Department and DCR. Because DCR is the landowner here, we were working very closely with Sarah White and her team on this project. It was grant funded by the state's Office of Coastal Zone Management. We closed it out on June 30th, so just under 2 weeks ago. And we were working with a consultant team led by Scape Landscape Architecture, which included Tetra Tech, Woods Hole Group, and Dawood as well. We also worked very closely with other state partners, including the MBTA, MassDOT, and the Boston Water and Sewer Commission to gain their technical expertise as abutting property owners and just generally having stakeholder needs in this project. Next slide, please. So the goals for the Tinian Beach project were to, 1, provide flood risk reduction to inland neighborhoods, as well as DCR's Morrissey Boulevard during large and rare flood events, as well as tidal flood events. 2, to preserve, protect, and enhance waterfront access and recreation by providing flood risk reduction to DCR's assets at Tinian Beach. 3, to preserve, protect, and enhance local ecology and open space. 4, to improve or be compatible with adaptation efforts of critical transportation infrastructure, such as the Southeast Expressway, the MBTA rail line, and evacuation routes from Port Norfolk. And 5, to improve or be compatible with adaptation efforts of stormwater infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, this project was identified in the Coastal Resilience Solutions for Dorchester report in 2020 as a near-term catalytic project. As you can see here, where the yellow and white arrow is, there is a flood pathway that goes underneath the I-93 expressway at Conley Street that is connected to Tinian Beach here. So this is the map of what that flood risk looks like with the 2030 1% annual chance flood plus the 2030 9 inches of sea level rise as stated with the MCFRM. Next slide, please. So this process included a lot of community engagement. As mentioned before, it was determined as a part of Climate Ready Dorchester. So you can see that engagement timeline on the left-hand side of this screen here. And on the right, under the Dorchester's Resilient Waterfront Project, is what we did between January of this year and June. So you can see that there is a ton of different agency communications between BPDA, the city, DCR, BWSC, MassDOT, MBTA, and several other participants. And then the yellow section here is the community engagement. So we hosted 2 virtual workshops for this project that went into the design so that we could get community feedback on what their priorities were for what they want to see at the beach, how they want to be protected, and how they want to enjoy the beach as well. This process also included a lot of just engagement at different various events such as coffee hours, one-on-one meetings with stakeholders, group meetings. We went to community meetings that are held on a regular basis. And we really wanted to get out there and do as much as we could to reach as many people as possible. Next slide, please. So this is what Tinian Beach looks like today. As you can see, there is the beach, there are the sports courts, there is a parking lot, and we looked to see what we could do to enhance this space. Next slide, please. Doing any sort of design on the waterfront especially has a lot of technical considerations that need to go into effect. Tinian Beach itself is an area of critical environmental concern. There is a Chapter 91 restrictions linked to it, and that is the Massachusetts Public Waterfront Act. You have to deal with the Wetlands Protection Act, and as well as coastal modeling to ensure that anything that we did design for this area would not increase flooding in any of the adjacent neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So this is where the proposed design ended up as a part of this process. We focused on access, which you can see here in pink, active recreation in black, passive recreational spaces in purple, and ecological benefits in this teal color here. Next slide, please. So as you can see, here's another map that was created by Woods Hole Group to show that 1% storm in 2030 and what those existing conditions would be without a project here. So again, that flood pathway under the I-93 expressway at Connolly Street is present. Woods Hole Group did modeling to see what would happen with the design that we proposed. And on the right, you can see that the area in Dorchester that would be flooded in this event would actually not have that flooding at all. And so the purpose of this project is to close that flood pathway. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, our consultants created some really great renderings of what this space could look like in the future. This is just a view looking south towards the Port Norfolk neighborhood. It shows some realigned harbor walk, picnic shelters, beach grass, stabilized dunes. The existing playground would remain, but we would be adding more sports courts. Next slide, please. Another beautiful rendering by them shows the view looking north towards the harbor. And actually you saw a very similar image to this of what it looks like today in Julia's presentation as the header slide, if you recall that. Next slide, please. And as mentioned, we just closed out this project on June 30th, and we published the full report that is 137 pages, including the executive summary and appendices actually yesterday. So you can scan this QR code here It has a lot of extensive detail about what we did, what the science is behind it, what the modeling is, the technical details. That really is just too much to get into in a 5-minute presentation, but please feel free to reach out to myself or Kat if you have any questions about this, and feel free to dive into this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat and Delaney. It's really great to have you on this panel to see, some actual projects that are being put into place. That's one of our visions for this initial conversation. Is we know there's so much going on in all of these areas, and I think this will be both informative and inspiring to places and people who are starting to think about this or on different paths here. So our final panelist, I would like to we'll go south down to take a little vacation down to Hull, and Christian Crawford from the town of Hull.
Thank you, everyone, for first of all inviting me to this hearing. I'm always up for speaking on things all Hull, but also Boston Harbor. And I also want to recognize Representative Moschino, who's from our town, and she certainly did shout some accolades out to the town of Hull. I also want to acknowledge our new select board member, Jason McCain's here. He's also part of your group. So thank you. Let me share my screen. I put together sort of a series of a number of different presentations that we're doing in Hull, and I just have this first slide up to show you where we are relative to Boston Harbor and the areas we're talking about, and I'm sure all of you are aware. But also, if you take a look at this picture, you'll notice that Hull is one of the barrier island peninsulas to Boston Harbor, and that has some significance as Hull moves forward into the future in terms of resiliency and climate adaptation. A little bit of background about our town's climate adaptation approach. We did enter into the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, conducted a community-wide workshop to enumerate what our priorities were in terms of how can we build our resistance and what kind of measures could we take that's adaptive and sensitive to the impacts of climate change. And in doing that, we created our department out of the Conservation Department, who administers the Wetlands Protection Act. And our administrators of the past have been doing a number of projects that certainly took it beyond the realm of wetlands administration. And so the town recognized at town meeting that this climate adaptation existential threat certainly needs a focused approach. And so we've sort of created within the department and the town, our department, which is climate adaptation and conservation. And we've also, as part of that, created a structure where information and guidance can be exchanged back and forth. And that's through a climate adaptation committee, which consists of, various policy members, select board members, and other leaders of the town that affect policy. So they certainly are the sounding board and a source to go to for practitioners like myself and others that are doing sort of implementation and planning on the ground. And that implementation and planning on the ground is through a working group that reports to the Climate Adaptation Committee. So that's just the backdrop of which we're trying to work and adjust as we move ahead. I did want to show you one photo that always astounds me. This was January 4th, 2018, when we saw the highest recorded level of seawater in Boston Harbor. And here is a wall that was put in by the Army Corps, I think towards the end of the 1940s, in an area in Hull that was known as Waveland, that received the kind of flooding we're talking about. Nuisance flooding once a month, high tide kind of thing. So flooding is not something that is strange to Hull. And the Army Corps back then came in and put this rather large wall, and I don't know what the elevation is, but from this photograph, you can see the person walking on what is known as Newport Road, and the water level is almost at the top of that wall. So kudos to the Army Corps for anticipating climate impact changes to our town. As you can see, this strategy that was placed in the 40s is now reaching near capacity of reaching over. And this area would be flooded quite extensively. And I've looked at some of the photos in the past of this area in the archives in Waltham that show just extensive flooding. And I think the take-home message here to practitioners and those of us who are listening and trying to come up with solutions to address these types of impacts is to listen and understand the local history. We're currently involved in a couple of projects. I'll try to quickly show you without taking too much time, where it really matters to get the feel of what the locals understand and what they're thinking and what they've witnessed in the past. So if you walked in freshly to this area and listened to folks and they said, oh, we used to get flooded all the time and it's not so bad anymore. Sometimes we're tempted to roll our eyes, get up on our soapbox, and then start to talk about climate change, sea level rise, the science behind all of that, without recognizing that there maybe have been some mitigation measures that really have changed this picture and taken it off that sort of typical trajectory that we expect for impacts to climate change. So with that, let me just show you a general product. One of the things we have, if you want, you can always go to the Town of Hull's department website, and we have a series of different projects there. One is a project that was funded through Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management that really looked at how can we use our natural assets to provide, to improve resiliency and reduce our vulnerability. And through the MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Workshop, we identified those priorities, and they pretty much aligned with what we had done in the past. And one of the number one pieces that we recognized that we could do was to actually improve our primary dune. And so we've done, for about 3 or 4 years with a large amount of funding through Coastal Zone Management's Resilience grant program, looked at where the vulnerable areas in our primary dune is. That primary dune actually provides a very good structure for coastal storm damage and flood control. As you can imagine, a dune beach system is very important, and the dunes are sacrificial. So they're the physical entity that bears the brunt of the force of overwash, storm surge, and others that bring waves to this area. And also, as sea level rise continues to increase, provides a measure of flood control as well. And I'm not going to go through all of this presentation, but I did want to share with you some thoughts about what our next steps are. As you can see, our community is highly developed. There is a lot of wetlands permitting that goes on. All of these homes are located in essentially dunes that are no longer functioning. People come to the commission asking, we're not on a dune. Why are we being regulated accordingly to a dune? And it's, that kind of concept that the town is dealing with. The other aspect that is emerging and becoming a huge management issue is these beaches in Massachusetts across the board are prime habitat for piping plovers. And I know that there's been a lot of press about piping plovers on various beaches. Nantasket Beach is a prime plover habitat. And so recreational use, storm damage protection, dune enhancement really has to be balanced now with the Endangered Species Act. And so we're working our ways through that. I did want to also talk about sort of the long-term, large-scale plans for this beach and the dune system. As you know, Hull is a peninsula that occupies the outer portion of Boston Harbor and actually helps protect communities inside the Metro Boston region, where storm surge is not as large of an issue. And it's largely because of these peninsulas, these barrier islands in the outer portions of Boston Harbor. So my pitch to this community and in this hearing is a resilient, vibrant Hull community is important to the vibrancy of the metropolitan region for what it provides in terms of physical resources. So we've done a series of studies, and we're looking to advance potentially doing some nourishment projects in the near future. And we haven't quite figured out how to navigate this sort of permitting challenge. There are resources offshore, immediately offshore, that provide beach compatible sand, but they occupy protected or habitats that are of great interest to marine fisheries. There is a good deal of study that needs to happen. But we certainly have looked at that. We've looked at the feasibility of what nourishment would be like on Nantasket Beach, because that would also add to the dune system. And as Julia Neisel from CZM pointed out earlier, that the erosion and depositional rates along this beach are extremely low. The nature of the beach is that it's a barrier beach that's pinned between two drumlins, and it faces the right direction. So it really loses very little of its material. But on the backside is we've cut off all of the sources. So it is a sediment-starved beach, but it took a really long time to get there. And it sort of favors this nourishment concept because it's a prime candidate for that. So in closing, I will just say that I did want to recognize Catherine Canless's slide of all the different things that could be done, from seawalls to elevating roads to nature-based solutions. That's a great slide. I'm going to probably try to steal that from you. Those are all aspects that we're doing, and I certainly would be willing to focus and share with you specific projects. And one last photo that I do want to share with you is a photo of such. We just had recently a workshop on a focused project in an ACEC, a neighborhood-wide project that actually is developing an adaptation roadmap all the way out to where one might have to entertain a planned retreat. And folks were very excited about what that meant. What do you mean by retreat? And it's also been part of our select board discussion, and it also shared our cartoon in our whole time. So we're starting that dialogue. But you'll see this photograph of a yardstick that shows what the predicted projection for a 1% storm event, what the still water levels might be. And I caution folks in sharing or even developing a visual like this, because you have to be careful as to exactly what this means. It actually portrays a fairly rare event, if you can imagine. A 1% storm event out to 2070, if you will, or 2050, isn't something that is going to be a very frequent event. And it's important to convey that message, what this actually means. This is an event that may occur, may last about 12 hours and be this deep. And are there ways that we can plan for this? And with that, I'm just going to leave it there and turn it over to the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I couldn't have closed that better myself. I'm really pleased to hear. I love a panel that I helped put together where I learned stuff that I didn't know before, as much as I don't want to admit that. But this has been really helpful, and I think really sets the tone for what we see at the commission and at Save the Harbor as a longer term process. As most of you know, the commission just put out a report on breaking down barriers for access on the beaches. And that really speaks to why we're starting this process. As we've spent 30, 40 longer years investing in these recreational resources, cleaning them up. My predecessor, Patty Foley, Bruce Berman, who's here, our longtime director of strategy and communications, really leading that cleanup so that we do have the cleanest urban beaches in the country here in the Boston region. And now we're looking at this, as Rep. Mosquito said, existential threat to these resources, not least of all, but of course also, as people have remarked on in the comments, to in some cases, in extreme cases, our lives. So this is really a first conversation. This is a first meeting. As we go into the comment period here, I would like to remind folks, to try to keep things brief. We're looking at a really high level for today. This is going to launch, like I said, a longer process. We will dive deeply into community by community, beach by beach. We know there's a lot of details. We think that there's a lot that each of us in our different areas can learn from others, based on the presentations we just saw. I think that's really evident. And so with that, I am going to open up the comment period. And the way we're going to do it is I will first acknowledge some of our elected officials who are here. Two folks who I know have a time constraint that I'm going to begin with. And then we will go north to south because the last meeting we went south to north. And we will start with Lynn and Nahan. And I'll ask folks to use the raised hand function, and Jason Rundle will acknowledge you at that point. If you do have a high-level regional comment, I would also say to have you raise your hand at the early stage there as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Senator Nick Collins, who I see is here, and would like to acknowledge you to speak, Senator.
Thank you very much, Chris, and for all the work of Save the Harbor, Save the Bay. I understand we're joined as well today by Bruce Berman, who with he and Patty have done a great job in stewarding what we have, as you mentioned, Chris, that you've carried on with the best and most clean urban beaches. And I know that folks on this call know, but and I didn't learn it till I was a teenager how bad the reputation was, because I didn't know any better. I was going to the beach, but the song "Dirty Water," which was popular across the world, and particularly the United States, was all about our Boston Harbor and Charles River. So, I mean, that speaks to the work that Save the Harbor, Save the Bay has done successfully for decades. So I want to thank you for that, as well for your work and leadership, Chris. I think the efforts that have been made to bring more access, particularly with diverse groups to our beaches, is really critical, and to having that be a sustainable opportunity for folks. And I think last year was very successful. I know we have a few more coming up in my district, sponsored by Save the Harbor and funded, which is incredibly important, not just to provide a welcome mat, but provide the resources to make it all work. So thank you. A couple of issues I think that we have here in the Boston region. We're lucky that we have the Harbor Islands sort of protecting us from the open ocean, other than some parts of the coastline up and down the north and south that are direct impact, as you mentioned, some of the beaches from the Haunts to Lynn to others that have take a beating more directly. But I think the DCR can benefit our beaches in the urban area for I think a decade plus, with some a little bit more investment in sand. There is erosion that takes place every year, but I think sand deposits are critical to be on more of a regular investment schedule. But I think overall, I think Save the Harbor, Save the Bay provides an incredible piece of advocacy towards this on a regular basis to keep the agency honest. And I have great faith in our new DCR commissioner, Brian Arrigo, who, in addition to, his work as a mayor of Revere, had a lot of interaction with the oldest public beach. That provides us with a great opportunity and a lens with someone in leadership who understands the challenges firsthand. We know that the agency, over the course of time, has transformed itself from two agencies, the Department of Environmental Management, to include the MDC, and now it's run as a DCR. What may have seemed like a great idea at the time, I think, had brought management challenges. I think we see the disjointed management, particularly in the Boston region, and how, the area and how it's broken down. I mean, right now we have Somerville, Quincy, Boston, all in the same region that have incredible needs. So I think that the resources are very, very much stretched in the Boston region, and the management's disjointed. So I do believe that is an important piece for the DCR and Save the Harbor's work to really look at. I know there's been encouragement from Save the Harbor over the years on that. And I do think the time is now to make those changes so that, there's a little bit more sense to how the Boston region operates. And then particularly because I think it's going to have a major impact on how we manage climate change. And that brings me to a little bit more of a localized approach on this discussion, which I think is going to, be about funding. And I think we have an opportunity now with the federal government that has funding set aside, and embracing some of the climate resiliency proposals that the city of Boston has put forth, and really investing in green space and the open space to bring about sustainable resiliency. And I think that's going to bring on more access, because it's going to expand the open space that we have available, as well as ensure that what we do is environmentally friendly. Because I think there's all sorts of good ideas out there, and they're not all environmentally friendly. I think the city's plan, along with the state, is one that if we invest in the green space and the open space and the natural resources that we have, we can bring about real long-term resiliency in a way that it expands our opportunities in a sustainable way. I think about areas like M Street Beach, which are really close to residential, which probably need to be looked at differently than they have in the past, because given the 100-year plan or the 100-year analysis that those houses could be underwater. So I think combination of what the city's looking at with Moakley Park, I think we need to really take a look at M Street Beach, as that's really much closer to the residential area than most of our water based assets up and down, at least in my district, from Hyde Park to South Boston. So I think those are really important plans to see if we can execute. And I think federal funding is going to be key. Of course, the state has to play a significant role, but embarking on climate resiliency investments that expand and enhance our green space, our open space, our beaches, I think is the way to go. So as you're, taking this feedback, I really appreciate the opportunity to testify with you today. And thank you again for all the great work that Save the Harbor, Save the Bay has done and continues to do on all fronts. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Senator. I really appreciate you being here, and thanks for your support and encouragement around the events in your district and on Carson Beach, especially. I'd like to acknowledge Representative Jessica Giannino from Revere.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Senator Collins, for that introduction to Revere Beach. I've had the pleasure of living in Revere my whole life, and in the last 30 years, I've seen how Revere has changed. And what's interesting to me is we still talk about the blizzard of '78 as a turning point in coastal erosion and what happened on Revere Beach. And that was 45 years ago, right? So our 100-year plan from when the blizzard of '78 happened to what's happening now, 45 years later, has changed drastically. Before serving in the House as a representative, I was a city councilor in Revere for 10 years. I see some city councilors on this call. And I remember driving with the DPW through different parts of Revere during these, king tides and different storm surges. And the Point of Pines and Riverside were completely underwater, right? Like there are parts of my community that flooded every few years that are now flooding yearly. And it's a residential beach. So it's important for our beach goers. It's important for accessibility and making sure people can actually enjoy the beaches and that there's sand there to enjoy the beach. But for me, it's also really important that people don't lose their homes, right? And that we're investing in infrastructure that's going to make sure that these homes are going to be here in another 100 years, right? Because as of right now, at the rate we're going, they're not going to be. So I think it's important that we continue to look at, vegetative berms and living solutions, not just concrete walls, because we've seen in Revere and we've seen in Lynn, concrete walls are not sustainable. They don't last. The waves are coming over them. They are beautiful, but it's a problem, right? So now in the Riverside neighborhood, we're redoing a whole area and we're looking at vegetative berms. We're looking at a living coastline that's going to help as these tidal surges and things happen to make sure that these are going to be resilient for years to come, and it's not going to have the maintenance that your standard, construction solutions would have. So I think, we're making all the right steps forward. We have all the right people together to have these conversations, to look at these issues. But I know particularly in the city of Revere, we're looking at working with the Army Corps of Engineers. Like many of our communities, our seawalls are outdated. They're not holding, they're not where they need to be. And making them higher is not a solution. Right? It's what do we do to make sure that this is a long-term fix, not a short-term fix that in 45 years we're looking at again and saying, how did we get here and how didn't this change? So I'm really interested in hearing from other people that are here to testify and hear from the community. I'm always here to answer any questions about Revere, but I really enjoy listening to other communities too. As a Massachusetts resident, I spent my weekend in Hull. I love going to World's End. I spend a lot of time on the water, and that's one of my favorite places to visit. So I found it very interesting to listen to, some of the things that are happening in that part of our Commonwealth. But just thank you to all the people, the stakeholders that are here today to talk about this. And I look forward to just listening and learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Giannino. And I do just want to acknowledge, I know there's some staff from a few of our senator and rep's office. If any of you would like to speak on behalf of your offices, please raise your hand, Doreen, Ben, Karen, or Yeji. If you do feel like you'd like to speak, again, I'd like to acknowledge you now, and I'll look for that hand raise. But you can think about it while, again, I said before we go to the raised hands, I have two, I'm trying to accommodate a couple, two folks. So would like to, before you have to leave, go to Aaron Clausen and Valerie Vong from the city of Lynn, the mayor's office up there.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. And I also want to thank Chairman Crichton and members of the commission for hosting this hearing today. My name is Aaron Clausen. I'm the principal planner for the city of Lynn. And I'm pleased to be here to learn a lot about what other communities and our peer communities and state agencies are doing to help inform the practice around climate change and climate change mitigation in our region. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the city. We've been focused on some of the preliminary planning efforts to better understand vulnerabilities to natural hazards caused and exacerbated, I should say, by climate change. Everything from coastal and inland flooding, coastal erosion, drought, rising temperatures. And because we have so much of our shoreline along the coast and tidal rivers, a key aspect of that is how do we become more resilient to climate change? How do we deal with the prospect of higher sea levels and more frequent storm surge and coastal storms? Some examples of that work that we've been conducting is the Harbor Plan. This was adopted in 2020. That really establishes a regulatory framework for the redevelopment of our harbor waterfront area that takes into consideration, rising sea levels and erosion, coastal erosion, and takes into consideration, flood mitigation that we need to carry out to make that work and be resilient going forward. The Lynn Hazard Mitigation Plan update was completed in 22. It looks at a broad range of vulnerabilities across the city, but many of which are focused on the waterfront and prioritize that work. And then lastly, we've been pretty engaged in planning and implementation around the Municipal Vulnerability Program, which you've heard about today, which I can state has been a critical resource for communities like ours to better plan for and access resources for implementation and programming. We've been a little bit more focused on inland flooding and implementing nature-based solutions and green infrastructure to mitigate flooding on that side of things, but are turning our attention a little bit more to the shoreline. In a couple areas that we've just begun is developing some preliminary design and engineering for flood mitigation along the Saugus River and the shoreline there to help mitigate flooding and coastal flooding along some pretty significant recreational amenities, infrastructure, and some low-lying neighborhoods. So that's some work that we look to finish off in this year. And we'll be seeking funding for implementation going forward. And then also similar to that, we're beginning a preliminary design and engineering for shoreline restoration along the harbor front, particularly in proximity to our Lynn Harbor project. This is essentially a transformation of a landfill, a former municipal landfill on our waterfront into a public park, 30 plus acres. But as a part of that, we're looking to design shoreline restoration that takes a sort of hybrid approach. Some of those that we saw today that Boston's deploying are some of those that we might be modeling to mitigate coastal erosion and flooding going forward, while providing enhancements to coastal habitat areas. And then recently, we've also partnered with some of our regional neighbors along the Saugus River watershed, Revere being one of them, to conduct a coastal adaptation plan, a sea level rise adaptation plan for the watershed itself, which includes about 5 or 6 communities, and just completed that in June of this year. And the next steps, we're all looking to seek additional funding through the MPP program to take that study and advance it, particularly looking at some of the flood pathways in the region, and further advance some of the concepts and mitigation concepts that were developed in that adaptation strategy, really focused on regional approaches, because we recognize, I think, and particularly in the Saugus River watershed, we recognize that it's going to take a regional effort, and we're going to be more effective if we partner to identify and deploy mitigation efforts on that front. And then just generally speaking, I think what we appreciate about hearings like today and other opportunities to engage with our peer communities is that there's clearly a lot to learn. There's a lot of different strategies that we need to try and pilot. And I think, like today from Boston and Hull, there's some strategies that we can build off and learn from to be really efficient around our tackling this issue. So again, appreciate the opportunity to learn a little bit from our peers and talk about what we're doing, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with many of you as we look to implement more effective strategies to prevent the effects of climate change. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I appreciate that, and I appreciate making the time and changing your meeting to be here. And one more to acknowledge your time crunch as well. I'd just like to give Kristen Uterwick, you're up next, since I know you have to leave as well.
Thanks, Chris. So my name is Kristen Uterwick. I'm the director of the Urban Harbors Institute at UMass Boston. I'm really excited that this forum is happening and that you guys are thinking about coastal resilience in the context of the area's beaches. I wanted to say something, Chris, when you posed the public comment period, you framed 3 questions, and I think one of them was about gaps and what's missing in particular. And building on that idea and something that Christian mentioned about what's happening in Hull, I wanted to just make a comment having to do with the concept of managed retreat and planning horizons. UHI did a study last winter on managed retreat, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term is generally the movement of people, infrastructure, and property out of vulnerable coastal areas. And in our study, we surveyed municipal staff throughout coastal Massachusetts to see if this tool was even on their radar and to learn more about the potential benefits and barriers that they saw. what we learned, which I'm sure won't surprise you guys, is that this is a very emotionally charged and challenging strategy to implement, and it's not being widely used right now. That said, the respondents valued its potential benefits, and there seems to be interest among municipal staff for tools and resources to advance the concept of retreat. And the most common tools and resources identified were education, and that was really education of the general public and of elected officials to just get them talking about climate change, and even to be able to start to have the conversations about strategies like retreat. And then regulatory tools to allow retreat to happen, because right now a lot of regulations don't facilitate retreat, but actually promote development in areas that maybe that's not the best strategy. And then also the third tool was funding for both planning and implementation of retreat. Now, obviously, retreat is not being widely implemented right now, but if we can step back and think about some of the data that I think Julia was showing us with regard to 2030, 2050, and 2070, planning horizons and beyond, if we start looking at 2070 and beyond, we'll probably see that retreat becomes a more realistic option for some locations. And so in thinking about that in the context of protecting beaches and access, there's a real opportunity to retreat in a way that does provide ecological and cultural benefits. You know, when the shoreline of Boston was created, a lot of the DCR beaches that you guys were talking about earlier today were created you know, with new shoreline. And so as you think about retreat as another sort of radical strategy to happen along the coastline, is there a way to do that, again, with the eye towards creating new access? And then retreat also is a way to protect existing access. So for example, if you're allowing a barrier beach to migrate through retreat strategies, you may not lose that access. So obviously it's not a strategy that's being widely implemented right now, but I just wanted to put that out there on everybody's radar. So as this group is thinking about protecting access and creating new opportunities for access, we can lay the groundwork so that retreat can be beneficial if it happens.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I appreciate you being here. And if you want to put the link to the, it looks like John found the study, but if you want to put the link to the meeting next week.
Oh, right. Yeah, thank you. We're having a webinar next week if anybody wants to hear more about our study and talk more about the concept of retreat.
All right, so I'm going to go. I see Ben from Senator Lydia Edwards' office has raised his hand, so I'm going to acknowledge the senator's office. Then I'm going to go to Bruce Berman, and then we will proceed with our north to south plan. I'll ask at that point that folks try to keep comments to about two minutes or so. If you have specific questions for specific people, please address them directly. We'll do our best to answer as much as we can, acknowledging we have limited time and this is a starting point, but we will, if we can't answer the questions in the meeting here today, we'll definitely follow up offline and continue that conversation. So Ben, please, when you're ready.
Good late morning, everyone. Senator, I work for Senator Lydia Edwards. She really wishes she could be here. She wasn't able to make it due to a scheduling conflict. She really wants to thank the Metropolitan Beaches Commission, Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, and of course all the stakeholders who've been coming together for years to do this really important work. And I'll keep my remarks short. And thank you all again on behalf of the Senator for the work that you do. We really appreciate all that we learned here today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Bruce, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. I want to thank Save the Harbor, Save the Bay for convening this hearing. It's a really important first step for the commission. These issues are critically important to everyone that lives from Nahant to Nantasket, in fact, anyone that lives on the coast. I guess if you want to know what the gap is, from my perspective, there's more than one, but the most important one to me is what's it going to cost and where's the money? And I do not expect anyone to answer that except for the folks from Lynn and from Hull who might have thought about it. But the truth is that the Boston Harbor cleanup cost $5,000 million. As I understand it, CGM has $35 million in grants available at this point to move forward on this. And that said, as we move forward in this process, I think that one of the issues that we really have to confront head on is to acknowledge the market and the non-market economic value of these beaches and these communities, and then to find ways to get the resources that we need to make it happen. Anybody?
Thank you so much.
Anybody from Hull or from Lynn want to tell me what they think it's going to cost right now, or any of the other panelists? Because that's a gap. Thanks.
Yeah, Chris Crawford, Town Hall. So, Bruce, if I'm understanding what the cost is in terms of a managed or planned retreat.
No, not necessarily retreat. I mean, you're
just in terms of adaptation.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, that cost is certainly a big factor of what we can do. Part of prioritizing what the town can do in terms of building resiliency, reducing our vulnerability, certainly takes a look at that cost factor. If it's going to cost something that's beyond the capacity of the state or the town or even the federal government to do, those are they are interesting ideas. I would direct you maybe to look at our Hampton Circle area project for an adaptation roadmap. It's an attempt to do climate adaptation on a neighborhood size scale. And in that process, not only do we sort of begin to understand how we can best communicate with all of the parties involved, most notably the residents, coming up with mechanisms to do that, but also to identify what is it that this town is responsible for, the state, the federal, and what are individuals' roles in adapting as well. So for instance, the Hampton Circle area lies in a very low-lying area that connects two drumlins, essentially, that now get flooded almost monthly on the higher high tides, maybe once every 2 months now. And folks are adjusting. They're moving their cars out of the way. They're looking at home elevation and those kinds of things. And then the town is looking at an archaic, antiquated drainage system. Is there something we can do there? So after you start to peel that onion away and identify alternatives, at the same time, what are the costs? What are the resources? And can we do that? And playing that sort of shuffle game, I guess, I don't know, for lack of a better word, that roadmap lays itself out. And it's also adaptive, right? So 2030 from now, if we do get another half a foot of sea level rise as projected, slightly more than that, that's 7 years away. 2050, whatever the horizons are realized, we're trying to come up with a plan that looks at that future and defines alternatives. And again, that's a good question, one that we have to always ask up front. And I can't give you a definitive answer.
Christian, I really want to thank you for the frankness of that answer. I mean, these are critical questions. I just want to remind everybody that the Boston Harbor cleanup was not paid for by the communities that are along the harbor. It was paid by 43 cities and towns in the region. And so managing and planning a way for the city, for the state, and for, frankly, the federal government to resources to come into play here is going to be critical to the success of this effort. And all I can say is the sooner the better. Thanks again, Chris. Thanks to Senator Crichton and for Chairman Modero, and also Joan and the other commissioners for being here today. This is a really important first step. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, quickly, and a shout out to the Commonwealth leading the country in providing these types of resources we need.
Exactly.
So, yeah, the Healy and Baker administration have been tremendous. So thank you.
And speaking of federal government, I did overlook Caroline Friedman from Senator Warren's office. So I did want to acknowledge Caroline.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for convening this call. This is really interesting, and I'm just here to say thank you. And, your federal partners are always here, and we're always interested in having these conversations about where the federal government can play a helpful role.
Thanks so much, Caroline. All right, so like I said, we are going to go north to south. So, if you're in Lynn or Nahant, please raise your hand. And Commissioner Barletta, I see your hand raised. I am going to go to Coco Alansug, since Lynn is just slightly north of Nahant, I will go to I'll go to Coco first. But again, if you are in Lynn or Nahant, please raise your hand and we will go in order. And Marie, I do see your hand raised, but I'm presuming your comments are about Tinian and Dorchester. So if you don't mind waiting until we get there, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. I just want to make this very short since our city planner, Aaron, already discussed a lot of what we've done here in the city. But it's very important for me to share this very brief history of my life. I represent a ward that basically covers most of Kings Beach. So, and I was also born and raised in the Philippines. So I came here as a 25-year-old adult man. So I didn't come here when I was a kid. So I grew up in an environment where we experienced 40 typhoons a year. And in fact, we don't hear words as super typhoon now, because that's something that we've experienced a lot. I remember as a kid, I always hang out at my grandmother's island near Pacific Ocean, and that island is not there anymore, nor the house. So moving to America, I really thought this is like a modern superpower country, right? That everything is possible, but lo and behold, there's still a lot of challenges here. The reason why I'm here basically is also to learn and to educate myself. So keep up the good work and continue pushing for what is right. Here in Lynn, we have a lot of challenges, but we're all talking, and that's the most important thing. So again, continue doing this, continue educating people, because I myself need to learn a lot as well. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else in the city of Lynn, residents who have a comment or questions? Again, Aaliyah's shared the questions. We're really framing this as what's working in your community towards climate resiliency. Where's the gap? What's the need? And what do you value about your waterfront? Valerie, yes, from the mayor's office.
Yeah, sorry. So I just wanted to follow up a little bit with what Aaron had said. I think he had already left, but he did the first part of our presentation, and I kind of just wanted to share that when talking about flooding specifically in Lynn, maintaining the seawall infrastructure, ensures that our level of protection is sustained and reliable for years to come, and ensuring that seawalls like the Lynn Shore Drive seawall receives mitigation and long-term maintenance is critical for shoreline stabilization, especially because Lynn is a coastal community. And I think based off of the data provided by Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, Lynn's coastal infrastructure today provides strong protection to our residents and neighborhoods. And also wanted to highlight that Lynn is an environmental justice community that is vulnerable to climate change impacts, including but not exclusive to the widespread changes in weather patterns, and that arises like heat waves and more severe precipitation, heavy or prolonged rain. And wanted to highlight that all neighborhoods in Lynn located along the shoreline are environmental justice communities. And then I think when talking about more frequent precipitation and increased rainfall that results in urban flooding, which overwhelms our local stormwater drainage capacity. And when this happens in particular, it's important to kind of highlight what's happening on our beach, and specifically Kings Beach. And so with heavy and prolonged rain, I feel like that adds to further closures to Kings Beach. And presently, Lynn residents do not have access to Kings Beach like other communities do with their beaches. And the waterway, Stacey's Brook, contains bacteria from sewers and stormwater and exacerbates the poor water quality conditions and contamination at Kings Beach. And this is unfortunate because this is a major environmental justice issue, and it acts as a barrier to beach access to residents who are predominantly low income in communities of color, and who often suffer from urban heat and need that cooling effect during the summer season and other recreational purposes. And I just wanted to share that if you want to learn more about what Lynn is doing in regards to Kings Beach and climate resiliency, feel free to visit the Kings Beach website, and then Lynn in Common, which is the planning department's website. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Valerie. All right, Commissioner Barletta, I'd love to acknowledge you at this point from the town of Nahant and from the Metropolitan Beaches Commission.
Thank you so much. I apologize for joining late, and I share all the compliments that folks who've spoken before me have already mentioned. I echo those. Town of Nahant, we're if it's not for DCR's Causeway and Rotary, we are an island. So we have, we have coastal concerns surrounding our entire community. We have when a storm rolls through, we have property damage, we have public health issues, but we are constantly at risk of being cut off from the mainland. If we have an emergency and our only road heading out of town, or only roads keeping our town connected as one town, get flooded, we can't get people off the island. We can't get supplies on the island. So climate change preparedness is even more, it's tenfold important to our community, because it's not just property damage, it's the difference of being able to potentially save a life during a storm. And so, because we're an island community and we don't really have any through traffic, our local budget is pretty much completely funded through property taxes, which, as everyone here knows, is capped at 2.5% growth every year. So when you talk about the gap, to me, there are a tremendous number of resources, grants, programs, technical assistance out there, thankfully, through our federal and state delegations and the work that they do. But when applying for that stuff, the competitiveness of those grant programs and the values that make a community's application more competitive don't coincide with the level of vulnerability. For a town like Nahant, which has an enormous amount of vulnerable assets and concerns, it's impossible to keep up with, being competitive with the other communities, being able to put up as much of a match, or based on the demographics of your town. Those things hold us back and prevent us from being able to accomplish or utilize a lot of those tools. And so, we're an MVP community. At the local level, we've adopted an expanded Wetlands Protection Act. We've adopted and expanded a Stormwater Bylaw Act. So we're doing the local stuff right. We're essentially, because our coastal infrastructure is so susceptible to climate change, and it's impossible for us to improve those quick enough, so that they're going to be able to protect us when the next big storm comes. We're forced to invest in infrastructure that's going to basically help us recover from the flood. So, when we're dealing with such limited funds locally, we're almost basically sitting ducks and saying, we have to put that money towards how quickly can we deflood an area, because we're not going to be able to prevent the water from coming. So, to me, I think the gap is really, it's money, but it's also timing. And I completely agree and believe in the science of natural coastal infrastructure and sacrificial dunes. The problem is that when it takes you 2 years to get through a study, permitting, construction, and all the grants associated with that, but every winter that dune is getting washed away, it's impossible to keep up with it. So, to me, I think that this commission, and with support from our state legislators and federal government, I think we really need to come together and think about how do we take the funding that is already available and the programs and the technical assistance, and how do we create a program that really meets with the communities and really starts to understand what their vulnerabilities are and what their limitations are, and how we're going to work together to improve them, because it is a regional issue, even though it's very localized, for us and for every other town. So, that's really been my push, has been, kind of reshaping or rethinking how the existing funding opportunities and programs and technical assistance works. And I think that right now it's kind of like they're available, but hey, you town, you have to come and get them. And you have to do the work to come and take advantage of it. Where a lot of towns like Nahant, it's just impossible to do that in the time frame that we need to keep up with climate change. So, really kind of finding ways to get those programs, those experts on the ground level, working hand in hand and giving the assistance to these local communities. And then the state will have a better idea of how all these vulnerabilities kind of rank within Boston Harbor. I think that's going to be a much more efficient way of accomplishing our regional goals and local goals quicker. So that's really my push. That's something that I've been really focused on, and appreciate the opportunity to kind of share that with everyone here.
Thanks so much, Tony. I'm just going to call out community names and ask people to start raising their hands as I say those names so we can get a sense of who would like to speak or ask a question. So, and then we'll just have the full list and we'll go from there. But anyone from Revere who would like to comment on Revere specifically, please raise your hand at this point. Pause for raising hands. And then anyone in Winthrop, anyone who would like to comment about Winthrop, please hands up. Then we would do East Boston. So I'd love to hear East Boston folks, if you can put your hand up this time. I know there's some comments in the chat as well. Feel free to use the chat. South Boston. And Dorchester. Maria, I've got you. So anyone else from Dorchester? Terrific. Quincy. I see you, Magdalene. I'll go to East Boston there for you. And Barbara, I'm guessing you're Winthrop. Quincy, I know we have a number of Quincy folks who emailed me, weren't able to be here. And then Hull, I know we've talked a lot about Hull, but anyone else from Hull who would like to comment? And then if you have regional or general comments, feel free to raise your hand as well. So I see Amanda Burrows. I'm not sure which community you're commenting on, but if it's Revere or the North Shore or Nahant or Lynn, please jump in.
Hi, Lynn now, but formerly Revere for 15 years. So, and I was right across from a dune that was roped off for the plovers. And if that dune wasn't there, the flooding would be a lot worse on that stretch of the road. But there were times, I think 2018, the water did come over the wall and flood the whole boulevard pretty much. And that dune was washed away. So I think dunes are a good idea, but they do still end up succumbing to the sea if it's bad enough. So I think dunes, along with other measures, are going to be needed. And then I had a question in the chat. I'm not sure who to pose it to, but I'm just wondering if there's any state or local initiatives to halt new development in high-risk areas. G&J is an example. The old G&J toll lot right on the mouth of the river, the Pines River, I believe, right near the General Edwards Bridge. I mean, that's a very, very vulnerable area. And the zoning was changed to allow an apartment building there. And I just think I'm not like a NIMBY, like no development anywhere, but I just think that area is a ridiculous place to put new residential buildings. And that's it. I'll pass it on to somebody else. Thank you.
No, thank you, Amanda. It's a really big question. It is a conversation that is happening in many communities, and it's going back and forth, and it's really part of why we're doing this. I think, as Kristen Uterich mentioned, the conversation on managed retreat is part of this. And I do know there are a lot of people turning this over and really trying to balance all the needs for protection and safety as well as for housing. But I don't know if any of the panelists, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if anyone has anything to.
Chris, I can jump in real quick, and I will just say, Rep Turco now is the state representative for the Point of Pines, Beachmont, and Revere Beach, but representing the city of Revere, I was on the council when a lot of that was happening. And through some of the grants of the state, there's over $7 million that's going to be invested into that parcel. And aside from the development, a big part of that is the city of Revere purchased the old boat lot next door. So that whole neighborhood is going to be transformed in terms of the investments that's going to be put into vegetative berms, into having a dock that we can actually access the Point of Pines Beach, a community rowing center. So these conversations have been happening for over 3 years. There have been dozens of community meetings that have talked about the impact of this in the community, where the funding is going to go, and how to make sure that this project is actually going to be one of the more transformative ones in the region that other people are going to be looking to say, look at the coastal resiliency plan that the city of Revere put into place. Look at the living coastline that Revere changed an area like the Point of Pines and Riverside, where right now all of that water sits on concrete and has nowhere to go. And we're going to have a whole new infrastructure underground based on how that area is going to be developed. So I know the state has put money into it. We got money from the federal government. Catherine Clark was down there with us a few months ago. So there's a lot happening there. And again, this has been going on for years. So I would definitely say you can reach out to the city of Revere. Elle Baker is the point person for a lot of that work, and she can bring you up to speed on some of it. But I mean, weeks, if you were to put all the hours together of meetings and time that's went into that project, there's a lot happening and a lot of pieces that weren't covered. So Amanda, I'm sure if you reach out to the city, they can educate you on everything that's happening and bring you up to speed, but that's going to be a real transformative project.
And I feel like some of our other folks with their hands raised may have something to say about this as well. I know they've been involved in conversations, but I'll leave it to that point as we're just trying to keep moving. But just to reassure folks, these questions are all going into the record. It's going to influence how we proceed and the questions we keep asking and discussing. So I'm going to go to Agnes Ricardo now.
Yes. Hi,
Barbara.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Agnes, program manager at Bike to the Sea, which developed and now oversees the newly constructed shared use Northern Strand Trail. It is about 12 miles in length, which goes through the communities of Lynn, Saugus, Revere, Malden, and Everett. The sections of the trail near Rumney Marsh in Revere and near the Saugus and Lynn line will be experiencing increased tidal surges and potentially risk trail access. With roughly over 350,000 yearly users, many use the trail not only for recreational purposes, but also for commuting in and out of Boston by bicycle and personal electric vehicles, providing less gas-powered vehicle traffic and usage. If the trail is compromised, trail users would be subjected to use their personal vehicles to get into Boston and surrounding areas. The emissions from these vehicles would increase air pollution and greenhouse gases. The future climate resiliency efforts and planning for Revere Beach will directly affect the Northern Strand Trail, as the trail and Rumney Marsh are located directly west of Revere Beach. Thank you for the opportunities to speak and contribute to this hearing, and I will include a link to the trail map in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnes. Going down to Revere, Barbara Bishop. Sorry, Winthrop. Oops.
Well, in terms of, thank you everybody for being here and for participating in this. I think what's working in Winthrop is, first of all, everybody's talking to each other. Everybody's, and all of these regional groups have formed to try to find some solutions. And that's a far cry from where we were a few years ago when we were just one little community trying to solve our problems. The problem is that not everybody agrees on what the long-term solutions will be. And we also have major developments at Suffolk Downs, and we have suggestions for a berm from Hull to Winthrop or Hull to Revere, which I don't know if some of you have heard Paul Kirsten's presentation. I don't think he endorses it, but he makes the presentation. He's from UMass Boston. And the cost of that, as Bruce pointed out, who knows how much that would be. One of the problems that we have in Winthrop is that in major flooding events, we become an island and we can't get off our island. So it's interesting that the town has started a couple of has done a couple of rehearsals, so to speak, of helicopter evacuations for medical people, people who are medically in need of transportation. And that's one way that we're preparing. But I'd also like to say that according to Senator Edwards, the closest trauma one center on this side of the tunnel, and we all know what's happening with the tunnel transportation now, is in New Hampshire. So we have major trauma centers in downtown Boston, but if we can't get there, that creates another level of problems for us. Winthrop is interesting because when you talk about managed retreat, Winthrop is prime for that, as is the low areas of Beachmont and Revere. So we're very interested in learning more about that and what federal funding might be available down the line. So thank you again. And I look forward to more of these regional conversations where we can share best practices or ideas or whatever. And I'm sure that all together we'll come up with some good solutions. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Magdalena, East Boston.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Chris, and the Metropolitan Beaches Commission and Save the Harbor, Save the Bay for convening all of us. My name is Magdalena, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harbor Keepers. And we're a very small grassroots organization doing resilience building, community coastal resilience building in East Boston. So in terms of this conversation, my concern would be that looking at the flooding, sea level rise, storm surge, obviously is critical. You see all of the cities doing plans. I've been involved in these plans. I think the gap is the lack of connection between sea level rise and storm surge flooding. And as the one woman before commented, with the extreme precipitation and the urban flooding. So that will also affect our access to the beaches, right? If we can't get there, if folks are, if they're prevented from transportation, then obviously what's happening in the ocean is not so much as critical as what's happening in the neighborhoods themselves. And also connecting the resilience piece, it's not just about climate change. And I always highlight this in all of our work. It's not just about the flooding and the extreme storms. It's really about resilience within the community. How resilient are the communities around these beaches? How are we as city, as planners, as leaders, helping the folks in the community, not just from, sort of flooding and climate change, but really helping them sort of, foster the resiliency organically within the community? Are they able to afford homes? Are they getting displaced? Is there too much luxury development happening on our coastline? And we can see this happening in Revere and Lynn and many other areas, East Boston as well. So just sort of linking this conversation about resiliency and climate change within the Beaches Commission to all of the other resilience impacts that are happening, sort of connecting that and talking sort of more holistically about resilience building, and then, how we're affected with access to our beautiful beaches and our spaces. Thank you.
Thanks, Magdalena. It's really well put. And again, a purpose, a goal of ours in this conversation really is just to briefly acknowledge like all the other work that's going on, not an exhaustive list, but folks from the Stone Living Lab are here, the Bar Waterfront Partners and crew and Boston Harbor Now and everything that's going on. Again, we're not trying to redouble efforts, but really, do our part to just be part of that conversation and look at that high level. So I think that's really well put. All right, we're down into South Boston. I believe Joanne McGinnis is going to speak from there.
Hi guys, my name's Joanne McGinnis. I'm working with Save the Harbor this summer, but I'm from South Boston, and the waterfront and the beaches have always been a really big part of my life. I can see the beach from my house, but as a child, like even the 3 summer camps that I went to were all along the beach on Carson Beach, the Harry McDonough sailing camp at Castle Island, And now, even as a 19-year-old coming back from college, me and my friends spend all of our free time at the beach on a sunny day. So it's a really big part of our community. And there's a lot of even just like other programming going on, whether it's like Volo on the beach or like our beach bashes. People are all the time doing like field trips to Castle Island. It's a huge part of our community, and I really couldn't imagine South Boston without the beaches. And I know that there are things going into place to mitigate effects of climate change. Like the Curly Community Center just got renovated, and they implemented like a concrete seawall to mitigate sea level rise. And earlier we were shared the plan for Moakley and like roadway rising. So I'm really happy to see those plans go into place, because it's such a big part of our community. But I think just like infrastructure as a whole needs to be like modernized and up to date. Like, what a coincidence we're on this call right now, and so many of our beaches are like polluted from sewage overflow because of the rain. So I think just keeping our infrastructure updated, and I know that the Commonwealth has plans to do so. So yeah, that's my spiel.
Thanks, Joanne. I appreciate you being here for that, and thanks for joining our team this summer. Although I will say, we are seeing a lot of stories about polluted beaches, but South Boston's beaches are not some of those beaches. All right, Maria, you were the first with your hand up. We've gotten to Dorchester, so thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chris. That's fine. And thank you for sponsoring this forum, Save the Harbor, Save the Bay. You do great work. I wanted to first comment about the process that's going on. Originally, like they stated before about Tinian Beach, the Climate Ready Boston came to the neighborhood, and we had a series of very good, productive meetings with the community, with posters and dioramas, and you could have a conversation with the engineers involved and so forth, and the planners. And then for some reason, a few months ago, it got switched to BPDA, and we went to, you get 2 minutes on Zoom, and that's it. That was very unproductive. We asked for a community meeting. We were told we were going to have a community meeting in person, and it didn't happen until after the comment period was over, and it was just one gentleman from the BPDA with a flyer, and that was it. So as far as community input with BPDA, they need to up their game, because what they are doing is not sufficient. As far as the plan is concerned, I've been saying this from the very beginning: you block water from going one way, it goes another way. Where will the water go? And even though they're saying in their plan that it's not going to go into Port Norfolk, I'm sorry, but the neighborhood does not believe that, because the neighborhood people, we've seen the water, even just during a king tide, go from the Tinian Creek into Port Norfolk. So we believe that their plan is going to increase the flooding in Port Norfolk, unless they do some kind of capture tanks or diverting the water, something. But as is, I think it's going to make it worse. Another point, they talked about Kings Beach contamination. Tinian Beach is closed because of the contamination. It has been for years, which is why, Chris, we haven't done a Tinian Beach Day, because last time we had Tinian Beach Day, we had to keep telling people to get out of the water, and I just can't do that anymore. So until they clean it up, I can't do another Tinian Beach Day. I'm sorry. But that's Boston Water and Sewer. They know what the problem is. I don't understand why it's not fixed. And like Kings Beach, we are also a minority neighborhood. The beach is serving these people, and it's a resource that isn't being used properly. And now we've got the Greenway Council has advocated for the trail to continue right to Tinian Beach and beyond. So people could ride their bikes all the way from Mattapan, Hyde Park, Milton, Quincy to the beach, and they can't go in the water. All right. Another thing is, somebody mentioned about stopping development in a high-risk zone. Well, I've been to meetings where they said, what can the city do to help the neighborhood? They can stop hurting the neighborhood. They've approved 6 large projects within a half a mile of Port Norfolk, right on the waterfront, all in high velocity flood zones, both from seawater and stormwater coming down the hills of Dorchester. These two things combine here. Yet they're putting 600 units of housing in the area, right on Morrissey and in Port Norfolk. This doesn't make sense. This is very poor planning. And it doesn't matter if they're giving something to the neighborhood, which they're not in this case, because they could have used that area for even better flood control if they didn't build anything there. And why put all those people at risk? And as far as, let me see, sorry. So, you know, I think the idea of stopping the development along the waterfront is something that needs to be really pushed because they're making it worse, not better. New York City, if you go to New York City, and I also saw this in Washington, D.C., they studied what they're doing in the Netherlands, and they're doing it right. Any type of new development is pushed back 100 to 200 feet. So again, they're giving a place for the water to go. You have a place for the water to go. But in Boston, no, they're building right up on the water still. It makes no sense. So we need to stop making it worse, basically, before we even start making it better. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. I appreciate you. You have a lot to say, and I know you did that very concisely, which was a feat.
I tried to be fast.
Yeah, no, I know. And obviously, like I said, we'll be digging down deeper into community by community. But it is 11:59. I hope people will stay for the last few minutes while we hear from our final two speakers. So we'll go to Isis Pinckney.
Okay, hi guys, I'm Isis. I work at Save the Harbor and I live in Rosendale now, but I used to live in Dorchester. And as a kid, like living in the middle of Dorchester, every weekend we would be at the beach because it gets really hot in Boston. And I'm looking at how things are now, and I feel like it's really concerning, like considering the situation, because like the water is contaminated, and as hot as it is, we should be able to go swimming. I feel like there's a lot of natural solutions that we can use to help like try to like stop the water from getting as contaminated as it is and rising like it is. Like there are things like mangrove trees we can use, and we can also have the dunes like we talked about earlier. And also like I think it was Maria that was saying it, the moving the buildings backwards so we can like stop having the flooding like rising towards the buildings, because that would stop a lot. Like it's like a prevention.
Thank you so much, Isis. Really appreciate you being here. It's pretty important for us to be engaging our youth staff in these processes, as they're really the ambassadors to the wider community as we connect thousands of people to the resources. And Leonie, I know you're here as well. Are you still going to make a comment before we close down, or did you? Oh, we had an issue with the technology.
Sorry, my device died. But hi, my name is Leonie. I work with Save the Harbor, and I just want to make a quick point on something that I've seen on where I live. I live at Harbor Point on the bay, which is next to UMass, and I seen a gap within like the citizens and and Carson Beach, because we know that teenagers kind of love to do parties at Carson, and I just seen like most of the teenagers mistreat our beaches. And whenever they throw like these parties, they leave trash everywhere and they mistreat our beaches and they take them as an advantage. And at some point, this is going to pile up and this is going to harm our community. And I just wanted to bring that to the table. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much, Leonie. A perfect example of why Save the Harbor and the Better Beaches program hosts teen beach bashes that are permitted with the DCR. Right, Nick? That's on the record now. Just to address like that, to make that welcome at it and make those formal and well run. So, well, listen, I appreciate you all staying for an additional 2 minutes. I'm happy to continue the conversation, though we will end the formal hearing. Thank you to all of our commissioners, all of our panelists, and all of our community stakeholders for being here. Again, this is a really robust and informative first conversation. There's so many of you here from so many different organizations and communities that are focused on this work. And we're really looking forward to keeping those conversations going with CZM, with BBDA, with Stone Living Lab, everybody who's here. I think it's clear that we had almost 100 people in this meeting, that this is something that there's no question to me that this is incredibly important to all of us. We're all working towards the same goal, the same effort. And yes, Amanda, we will have the recording uploaded to our website, and we will communicate with everyone who is here via email to let you know when that's up. And I'm sure we'll post it to our socials as well for folks who aren't on that email list. So with that, we'll end the recording, and thank you all.
Thank you.